Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Just Another Kill Team podcast, connecting kill team communities across the globe. If you're passionate about the tactical skirmish game that brings together strategy, lore, and creativity, you are in the right place. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and stay updated with our latest episodes. If you want to support the show, check out our Patreon. Your support means a lot to us. Follow us by using the social media links in the podcast description for all the latest news, and be sure to leave a review to let us know what you think. Thanks for tuning in. Here's today's episode. The button is pressed and we have begun officially. Welcome,
William of the New England kill team scene. Welcome back, actually.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, guys. I'm really excited to be here.
Yes, welcome. For all of the listeners that didn't hear you the first time, what's a quick spiel about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is William York, or Will York. I'm a member of the New England Kill Team community. I'm one of the major TOs for our GT level events, but also our local events. I also help run and support our community via Discord, or starting events, organizing events, including tournaments and weekly nights. I've been playing Kill Team for about a year and a half. I came from 40K. Which I played for about 23 years, about 10 to 15 of those competitive. And yeah, it's been an incredible ride. I've really enjoyed it. Last time I was on, talking a little bit about the hobby aspect, and talking about my boys, the golden boys, mine, the corn boys in their case, but the custodians. So we're hoping that someday they'll come back. But since then, I've been playing some Warp Coven, playing some Salvengers, and having a really great time.
That's excellent. Cool. What was the last year that you played 40K competitively, if you're not still doing it?
So my last year playing 40K was 2024. So I ended in 10th edition right at the beginning. So I played competitive 5th, 6th. I skipped 7th, and I played another game system, a War Machine, for that period of time. Came back in 8th. Played 9th, and then played the beginning of 10th. And personally, 10th was an edition that I really just didn't enjoy. And it was a really big change just in the scene and aspect. I think it's still a really great game system. And I think it's a really great game system for newer players. But I was really turned off, and I had too many Warhammer models. So a buddy of mine was like, why don't we try Kill Team? That seems like a thing. Oddly enough, I had played Kill Team. I'm not sure if it's 1 or 2018, whatever version of that it was. I played that version. So I was familiar with the small skirmish size, and then got into 21 and loved it. Instantly started playing locally, both tournament-wise and some weekly nights. Really, really enjoyed it. It's funny coming from 40K. 40K, you have these massive armies. So you're like constantly just building and updating, and you're doing that. With Kill Team, there's so many armies, but they're not as big. So I'll give myself maybe a little off the shoulder here. I own every Kill Team in the game, painted and built. So they're sitting on a shelf, which sounds very impressive, but when you come from 40K, it's really just a drop in the bucket. So I think that's one of the things that I really like about Kill Team, is that the hobby aspect is really good. There's so many choices, and there's so many really fun different strategies and ways to play.
Yeah, it really is. Like, if you own every Kill Team, it's kind of like owning one 2,000 point army, which is just, pretty just like respectable. It's not that irresponsible. I mean, I may or may not have had like 10,000 points of Death Guard at some point.
Yeah, I think the craziest I ever got to was I had an Imperial Guard army in 5th that was probably 50 to 60,000 points. I had all the Bane Blades and the tank. Like, I had everything. I had a Titan. And I had to sell that off for various reasons at the time. And then when I came back into 8th, I would basically hover about 5,000 to 8,000 points, so that I would have just almost everything that I could possibly imagine, and combinations of that. I think Kill Team is a game where one of the really nice things about it is it's a lot easier to magnetize and build different models and things like that. But like when you need a Lehman Russ in 40K, and it has to have that turret and that thing, and it has to be painted for that tournament, you have to have it all. So it becomes a hobby aspect of that really takes a lot out of you, which is a lot different from the Kill Team piece. And that's why when I came over to Kill Team, the other thing too is I had some life changes too. I became a dad and I didn't have as much time. So it was also really helpful to have those pieces where, it was nice to be able to be like, all right, I'm going to take 20 dwarfs with me rather than 6 boxes and a travel, cart and all these things to go to an event. I couldn't imagine going to the New York Open playing 40K. Those guys playing 40K at that event, hats off to them. They are the real heroes of that event.
Yeah, the real secret to the New York Open existing is that there were already enough insane people who wanted to play 40K and play Kill Team. So we figured if we get everybody in New York into one spot, we could run a tournament. And it turns out that has been the case for the last couple of years. So here's to next year doing it all over again. Obviously, the struggles of a 40K player trying to find their footing in Kill Team. There are so many different playstyles in Kill Team that, what skills transferred over and like what habits or things did you take as a competitive player that maybe players wouldn't know? Because one of the good things about getting better at a game is you learn different strategies for getting better at small slices of your competition mindset. So like, for example, in Magic the Gathering, you need to figure out if your decision was wrong or if the result was wrong, because decisions and results are different. Right. So when you comes to like rolling a single die in Kill Team, you could say, I'm going to reroll this 2 up and then I miss it. And you think, oh, I shouldn't do that next time. But really, in most cases, you should. So were there things that you brought over from 40K that you feel like still are relevant? Or did you feel like you had to change up the toolbox a lot more when you came to Kill Team?
I think there's a lot of good things that I brought over. There was a lot of things that I was hoping that were certain ways that, especially when I was starting, when I started playing Kill Team, from the competitive side of 40K it's been around for a really long time. So how events are run, both from like your local game night to your tournament, to your GT, to your major, to your super major, and all the formats that go with that. They've been doing it, for a really long time. And so, Kill Team's just not as old of a game as 40K. And so you have TOs who've been doing it for like 15, 20 years. It's crazy stuff. And so I think one of the things is that Kill Team had a lot of things that I had to relearn because they had a lot, not necessarily newer TOs to competitive gaming, but because the game wasn't around as long, in the community and the terrain and this and this and this were so different that you would almost be constantly evolving tournaments. So when you had, for 40K as a great example, in 9th edition, you kind of knew what your season was for about 3 to 6 months, and your plan was written in stone. So you would practice, go to your locals, go to your kind of RTTs or your Rogue Trader tournaments, which is like your local tournaments. You go to your GTs, then your majors, super majors, and you had a really strict plan. And it was always kind of based around the FAQ schedule and what that looked like. Whereas I come over to Kill Team, man, that changes. It changes so much faster. Like the team changes so much faster. The other thing too is that like terrain sets will come out and, parts of the community will really like them. Parts of them won't. A great example is Beta Decima. And, in 40K, you just keep practicing your layouts over and over and over again. And you knew that you were going to play that. Whereas you might go to a tournament in Maine and we would play Beta Decima, and then I'd go to New Hampshire or Vermont or Massachusetts or whatever, and they wouldn't. And that was really tough. And so I think that was a big kind of changeover too. So I think those pieces were tough for me at the first. The things that I brought over from competitive 40K was, I think when you go to a tournament, there's a lot of good habits you should do. One, you should have all of your things packed up the night before, double check everything. Don't worry about that in the morning. No, it's all packed up. Two, I think a lot of people don't hydrate very well during that. I was a competitive swimmer growing up, so I think it's really critical to make sure you're hydrating through those events, those sort of deals. Make sure you're eating plenty. I think the other thing too is take mindset of what's going on. So because you've written your plan pretty concisely, you should be able to come to the table and there shouldn't be too much of really worrying about your opponent. And that was also a big changeover from Kill Team. So in 40K, your list didn't really change, right? Your list was static. You had set it up before the event. So there wasn't a roster selection part. There wasn't those things. There was maybe some minuscule things that we would pick and change, but for the most part, everything was set in stone. And so I come to Kill Team with the same mindset. My I was looking at my spreadsheet, and I'll talk about that in a second. My spreadsheet for tracking what I take for secondaries, for TAC ops, and things like that has been the same for the entire edition for 2024, and that is for 25 competitive games, tournament games. I've never not taken Contain. It's been my same one every single time, and I think that comes out of my 40K aspect of just having a really set plan of how I'm going to play my game and what that looks like. And then I'd say the last piece is enjoy it. Enjoy the hobby part too. I think it's really awesome to share your models at events between rounds, talk to your opponent about their strategies as well. That's also really fun, and you can learn a lot from that. I love seeing that in Kill Team, but that's something I really take away from 40K, because if you have a good or bad game and it finishes quick, you're still there for 2 hours. So you got to kind of work through that and talk about it.
Yeah. I want to circle back to the fact that you said you've played Contain for every single thing. First of all, just real quick, did you play the same team every time?
No.
So then roping that in, you haven't played the same team every time. As you switch teams and you know that you're going to play Contain because it's your favorite, I'm sure you go into it with a strategy because you know that like you've got a good game plan to contain the enemy as you jump through different teams. Do you have sort of like a process that you think about as you're like planning a strategy for each new team and how to take on playing Contain?
Yeah, so in 40K, when I played one team for an entire year. So generally speaking, I would kind of play some different factions here and there as like a kind of a fun thing, but for the most part would play one team for an entire year. And usually I would play between 100 and 125 games, including tournament games, in that year of that faction. So in my last run in 9th edition, it was Death Guard, Tyranids, and then it became Imperial Guard. And they all played pretty much in the same style of play, where it plays it almost identical to Contain and how it plays in Kill Team, where I basically would set up a line of engagement. If you crossed over, set a line of engagement, I was going to shoot a lot of guns and things at you, kind of stop you there, excuse me, and then be able to kind of move around you once I've kind of killed a majority of your faction, and move around that. When Contain was shown into 24, I was instantly like, great, I'm playing 40K again. I'm going to create that strategy. So essentially I'm creating in military doctrine, it's referred to as a kill box. So you're setting up basically your line of engagement, and this is what you're hoping your opponent will come into. You engage them, shooting, melee, whatever that looks like, push them out. If you're unsuccessful at that, you've still got them closer to you, so you have tools to just kind of interact and deal with that. The nice thing about Kill Team 24 and my strategy, and it played well into 9th and 8th edition as well, if I can't score my TAC ops with Contain, I move over to the kill ops, or I move over to the crit ops, and I'm able to score those. And my opponent is closer to me, so now I can engage them and hopefully whittle them down quicker. Doesn't work perfect into like teams like Warp Coven and Legion, but I think not a lot of things work really well into those teams right now in general. So I think in the general play, it creates that kind of play. Once opponents figure it out and they start to try to move and delay that scoring, it's easy to react because you know where they're going to go and try to do that.
So has there been a lot of players in the New England area who have started to set models up to break Contain, at least for the first point? Because breaking 2 points of Contain generally is not worth it early on, but at least the 1 point, making sure if you're getting out activated, depending on which team you're playing. Warp Coven can get out activated. Hearthkyn Salvagers less so because they've got 10 models. So are players flirting with trying to break Contain, knowing that you're probably going to take it since you are always taking it right now, and you're not really flirting with the idea of changing it up with a take ground or some other security strategy?
Yeah, folks are certainly kind of warming up to it, but on an average, so I track all my games and my tournament games, particularly on score. I average 4 points. So even if I lose kind of that 1 point, what ends up happening is I see that my kill op stays at an average of 4 points as well. So it almost kind of plays well into each other. So the two things kind of interact where if I'm not scoring it, they're closer. Hopefully I'm going to break that and then break those models and then move into scoring crit ops and continuing scoring tac ops. The things that are really tough into that is Mandrakes. Mandrakes is a really challenging matchup to it. And when I was in 2021, I particularly was playing Custodies would play really defensive and far back, which kind of blocks out some of that play. But I'm finding that to be one of my harder matchups. Blades of Cain also can be really difficult too, right? If they kind of sneaky into there. Same thing with Harlequins. But with folks playing a lot of elites, it plays really well into the elite meta that we're seeing a lot into New England right now.
Yeah, so right now it feels like when everyone else is playing Astartes tier threats that are very dangerous, Warp Coven, Legionary, Angels of Death less so, Death Guard less so. Everyone is trying to play Contain right now. So if two Contain players face off, they just kind of stand around egging each other to go in. But, if you're playing Hearthkyn Salvagers, you can fly a model into your opponent's drop zone, which can be very hard for them to stuff, especially if you're getting the out activation advantage there. However, you just talked about it. The layer of the meta right underneath Astartes is the elves with their power swords who can trade reasonably well into most teams that are a little wider than them and can still threaten elites. Jason had some success with Blades of Cain, basically taking shots after hitting with power swords on Banshees against Astartes and chipping them down. So there is like a layer of the game that threatens Contain. So you need to have a plan for when people figure out that plan, right? One of those things, I'm sure this comes up in 40K too, and this is kind of why we wanted to ping you about strategy, is eventually you're going to hit a player where your level 1 strategy is not going to work, and you're going to have to deal with the level 2 counterplay strategy, which is something that Kill Team gets to a little bit faster compared to other games, just because the problem space is a little bit tighter and your decision matrix is not quite as far away. We're in something like 40K, where if you get one big shooting step, the game kind of falls apart right there, and then you're just playing cleanup for another 3 turns. Whereas like in Kill Team, unless you're going crazy and you're giving people big blast clumps, you don't generally end the game in one activation. It's generally going to be a reasonably large chain. So you are playing Contain, your opponents are playing Contain. How are you expecting people are going to break the stalemate, and how are you interacting with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Twofold. I think one is comes out of practice. So when I was playing 40K, again, I would try to average about 100 to 125 40K games in a year with a faction, which is a lot. I finished 9th edition with 528 games between both practice and competitive, and I had some really incredible players in my community and some folks that I really got a lot of good practice with. So when those kind of strategies started to fall apart, I would go back to that practice piece. But tends to be my strategy is when that starts to fall apart and not work well, I tend to I go overly aggressive and try to go really into that step of trying to throw off my opponent. A really actually an incredible game that I played recently was George at the New York Open, who I won the event. An incredible Warp Coven player, incredible player.
He's the top 8 at World Championships, so obviously a very good player.
Yeah, he's amazing, and just absolutely an incredibly kind and an amazing opponent to play against. We were playing Warp Coven into Warp Coven, and I didn't know him very well. Everyone, in his record before we started playing. What was interesting is that I took Contain, I took some Zangors. If I remember correctly, in that matchup, he did not take Zangors. So I assumed he was also taking Contain because I figured it was a pretty good strategy on what we were trying to do and what wizards he was taking. And it ended up that I want to say he was taking something in Recon. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. And when he had changed to that, it was really interesting because my Zangors who were pushing in to kind of block that, the going over aggressive really fell apart. And it was a tough situation where he kind of predicted that or, in some planning and procedurals and did really, really well. So that was a really tough loss on that. But on the other side, same thing at the New York Open. I played an opponent first round who was playing Wormblade. He was also a really good player as well. I want to say his name is Jeff.
Yeah, he almost made the golden ticket for the New York Open. So
he had I had I had played Wormblade right at the end of 2021, so I knew their rules well. I was thinking about switching over to them into the new edition, but the rules didn't stick well for me personally. I had to play incredibly aggressive in that game, and I think that helped to set his models back a little further and allowed me more kind of wiggle room and ability to interact with the play space. And I think that was a big component of that. So that would be my big piece, and that came over from 40K. Again, if you're kind of down in the dumps, your best chance is might as well charge and hope to roll sixes. So especially if you're playing some incredibly world class players like I did down in New York.
Yeah, I think it's really good to know when you can rely on your strategy. Back in the day when Pathfinders were good, part of the strategy was I'm going to set up a bunch of marker lights, blow some people up. Nowadays, Pathfinders aren't nearly as good, so being able to set those things up, not really as useful. So you got to come up with an entirely new strategy. Jason, he's been the overly aggressive player, but it's paid dividends because it turns out a lot of people have a strategy of people are going to feed threats in slowly, but if you overload your opponent with 6 3 APL models, you can get a lot of things done. So that's like a strategic choice. And then once the strategy has been set up, it's all about the minute-to-minute tactics, and that's when Kill Team really shines compared to something like 40K where the tactics still take a long time and you still got to make it through a big round of heavyweight punches. You can do a lot more tactical play of, setting people up, throwing people off the scent, which is nice. So it turns out that George being able to play not contain definitely threw your Zangers off into the wrong position. And that's like a fun little piece of tactics mixed with strategy.
Yeah, that's a wonderful place where those two meet. I do like to think about, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but one of the things when it comes to building a strategy for me is threat saturation versus drip feeding threats. Some teams do a really good job of drip feeding threats, like Inquisition, for example. They just want to use their free dash plus the 3 APL from the Hearthkyn to essentially just catapult individual models every turn to do catastrophic damage. That's the perfect example of the drip feeding threats. Whereas
novitiates were also somewhere in there. You whip up a girl with a big chainsword, strap her with a crack grenade, she flies into opposing lines at a 10-inch charge and then drops a crack grenade that always lands 4 hits. So those are examples of single threat missiles.
Yep,
whereas something
feed.
Right now,
with
Legionary, the Stardies, you can just walk into the midboard and see what happens.
Yeah, Legionary especially. And then I had a lot of success with Phobos also as a threat saturation team, where if you just full sprint to the middle of the board and pop smoke on everyone, and then you ignore piercing, you're obscured everywhere, and then you've got your angles on the people that threaten you, and if someone has an ignore obscurity threat, they know they can't shoot you if I have 4 people that ignore obscuring, and if they do shoot, then it's totally fine because usually they'll injure 1 Space Marine and then the 4 guys that are going to shoot back are going to kill you and that threat goes away immediately. But just the threat saturate of just the stage so many just aggressive positions, and then if an opponent, especially against hordes, if an opponent has 2 different models that can 1-to-1 trade, but you 2-to-1 trade against them first, it works out in your favor. Especially Phobos can omni scramble people. You can throw stun grenades. They've got a lot of tools to handle that well.
Absolutely, and I think the other thing too that comes out of it is, especially with the aggro play, is that you can really throw an opponent off in the aggro play. So, it's really tough losing 2 Astartes models, turning point 2, for instance, is a good example. And so I think that can be really challenging too. So that aggro play can at least give you a little bit of wiggle room to, continue with your plan and maybe kind of regroup and make a new plan, while they also have to kind of regroup in the same way. The other side too is that we saw a lot of this, especially in New England at the end of 21, Kill Team 21, which is a lot of people are playing Nemesis Claw. And so because of Vox Scream, so many people were getting really good gotcha plays on that. The way we kind of figured it out, and I was kind of teaching and talking with folks, is having those multiple plays and set up so that even if they Vox Scream, model A, you can switch over to model B or model C. It also it allows for that, you want your opponent to make mistakes. That unfortunately, like, that's the end of the game, is like you want your opponent to select the wrong target to start off with. And then if you can capitalize that and continue that aggro play, it works really well. Doesn't always work. It's not a foolproof plan, but it can be really effective and helpful. And I've found a lot of success with that. And there's a lot of really good teams that do that. I mean, I think Salvengers particularly do it very, very well, and do a really good job of trading up, but also playing that really aggressive game.
Yeah, I think that brings us to, Hearthkyn Salvagers is the team that you're currently playing. You played Warp Coven at the New York Open. You've obviously played a little bit of everything, with the humble brag of having every single Kill Team to date. So obviously you got a lot going on, but you're on Hearthkyn Salvagers right now and still playing Contain, unlike, your team playing Warp Coven. I assume they do still have some commonalities in how you can approach getting Contain off. You mentioned earlier that you want to set up a kill box and then swing in or chip away as people try to break your Contain. Hearthkyn Salvagers do have the famous missile piece that not a lot of teams have access to right now. I know that Dylan did pretty well at the New York Open. He did all right at the World Championships as well, committing to much the same Blitzkrieg strategy. Are you doing the same Hearthkyn Salvager Blitzkrieg? And if you are, you want to tell the listeners how it's laid out so that people can get a feel for what's going on in the Hearthkyn Salvager world.
Sure. I actually I played at a tournament yesterday and did the rocketed my jump pack twice in two different games. In the first game, was able to kill the sniper for Angels of Death in melee, and then throw a crack grenade right afterwards and kill an additional Space Marine as well, which was really exciting. So one of the cool things that Salvagers do, and especially the jetpack, is the jetpack has fly, which is great. He can fly 8. He can charge from that, but he's moving his 8, so he's kind of a little locked in there. The other piece there is that if you can, there's two ways of doing it. You can give him an additional APL from the comms. I always get Salvagers all the models the wrong name. Like they all have really very fun names, but I always get them messed up. But the comms can give an extra APL, which is a good setup on, especially on like a Volcus or a Beta Decima. If you can kind of set up preemptively, give the comms boost at the end of the jetpack's activation. Then the comms collapse gives the APLs. Then you're kind of set up for turning point 2. The other part you can do is Ancestors Are Watching is also can be really helpful into that as well. That gives you a free or fight or shoot action at the end of its activation. So you can do it in kind of 2 different ways, which is really sweet. The other piece you want to do is you have to take crack grenades. So you take crack grenades as one of your equipment options. Really good for Salvagers anyways. There's a couple ways you can just get out your normal 4 points. If you take a lugger, it's even more free. And then you want to take approximate firepower as well as a strat, which is if you're within 6, you get +1 to hit with shooting attacks. And then if you want to go really crazy, your leader can apply a grudge token. Grudge tokens get applied as models die as well. And then if they're really on an objective or something like that, you can do Toil's Urns and just really double down on really a really good melee operative. He's 4/6, lethal 5 up. Usually can set up with a crit in some ways. And then the crack grenade is a crack grenade, piercing 1, and you can also hit on 3s and set that up. I think the other thing that Salvagers do really well is apply really good a balanced reroll from the attack token, as well as applying the second token from the Logatar, which takes off cover from Saturate and gives you an accurate 1. So there's a lot of ways of getting really good dice fixing and be super, super aggressive.
Yeah, so like a 10,000 foot overview of the Super Alpha Strike is your jump pack dude can jump in, just murder someone with crazy melee that you can super duper stack with all your buffs to make it alarmingly reliable, alarmingly like he'll kill a Space Marine, and then with a third APL or the Ancestors Are Watching, nuke another Space Marine, and then there's that crazy thing where you can pretty much guarantee initiative, where you get like +4 to the roll or whatever, where the next turn you basically just double Alpha Strike again, and it wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world if if that one jump pack guy killed 3 Space Marines, and like I guess it's theoretically possible he could kill 4, and that's just like the first violence of the game is the jump pack guy kills 4 Space Marines. It's totally insane.
Yeah, when talking about just brutal, unchecked aggression, the Hearthkyn Jump Pack Warrior is currently probably the most aggressive model in the game, because between your equipment called, I think, Need Keeps or Writ of Claim, that lets you basically add anywhere from 2 to 3 to your initiative score, you almost are guaranteed initiative unless you roll horrendously and your opponent rolls perfectly, because for every objective you're contesting and for every objective you control, I think you get an extra result for your initiative, so you can basically stack like 3 pretty reliably, and you should be setting up for this, because if this is your strategy, you're dumping all of your positional play, a bunch of your equipment, and probably one of your most mobile operatives that in the last edition was being used for positional play. Now he is threatening an 8-inch charge, so midline charge, or if you spent to reposition, now you have effectively a 14-inch threat bubble, where if your opponent touches that midline, you get to reproduce something the Star Striders used to do, where you yeet up a melt-a-gun and just nuke someone at the midboard. So you could do those things, or I think what I've mostly seen Dylan do is, or maybe not just Dylan, but like Hearthkyn Salvagers generically do, is you'll get the APL so you can move up your 14 inches and then chuck a crack grenade. And that chucked crack grenade is hitting on 3s with proximate firepower. It might have a grudge token, so it might be hitting with crits, and that'll be the last activation of the turn. And this specifically hunts Space Marines and Elves very, very well, because now you have an operative 11 inches up the board who's probably killed someone with, 4 dice on 3s, 4 5, crack grenade with Pierce 1 and Saturate. Your opponent's gonna have to roll pretty well to get out of the hole. And then the beginning of the next turn, you Writ of Claim and you just immediately do it again. But now, instead of just doing the same crack grenade throw, you get the charge, the fight, and the shoot if you really need to, because you get to take 2 crack grenades. No one says that you have to take a frag grenade.
It works incredibly well, and even if you get the only the 2 Space Marines as an example, what ends up happening too that's really nice is that because you're playing Contain, or in my case I'm playing Contain, so it forces my opponent to try to deal with this model in some capacity. So if it decides to do kind of a mid play and then go out, it's still a dwarf. They're kind of hard to kill. There's some good abilities to try to retain some defense dice with a strat as well. If you have 2 fails, you can retain 1. There's a couple pieces there, but what's really fun is he's out there. I'm really scared of him. I'm going to turn around and shoot him, and it allows the rest of the team to continue to move up and continue to kind of oversaturate, which is really good. So even if he gets 2, inevitably you're going to get a grudge token on another model. They're going to be out of position. And then another thing that I really like about the Salvagers that you can do really well is utilize some of the gunners. I'm a really big fan of the missile launcher, particularly. Is a really good piece that can do some really great damage, both to Hordes teams and to elite teams, and is a nice follow-up to the jump pack model. You also, as well as if you can get some models kind of out of position, you can start to utilize your spot ability. This is from the Locatar, who can select one model that works really great against elites. Any model within 3 inches of that model will have Seek Light and ignore obscuring. So in a lot of ways, what will happen is they'll go after the kind of overutilize resources to go after the jump pack. They kill it, okay. But then they'll usually, like in a lot of cases, I've had players throw smoke grenades and kind of be out in the open and think that that's going to save them. And then you get a rail rifle that shoots them next and kills them on the spot. So that trade-off works really well. I think the other piece that's really good for Salvagers, that's really a really aggressive and good piece, you have to do a little setup here, is the guy with the demo mine. He can only move 5 when he does it. He also has crack grenades, so you can still utilize kind of the similar crack grenade strategy. But that demo kit is amazing. So he's someone that people kind of forget about. He eventually kind of wobbles his way up that 5 inches and throws this 4-inch, he throws his 4-inch demo kit and will kill another Marine. So, and he's one too, where if they want to go challenge an objective, let's say they kill him in melee or what have you, you're not too sad about losing him. And then you can return and retaliate with some of your heavier weapons.
So this is like a good example of a current strategy that works very well in the current meta, especially when you're preying on elites, and it works pretty well against most things. But the real thing and the real counterplay against it is a player who knows it's coming and basically like sets up to catch a grenade or a lone jump pack who's coming in to go do a kill, right? And if you've set up all of these resources to try to guarantee this thing and your opponent's just plays way back and is waiting for you and doesn't really give you a target, or only gives you, for example, on Legionary, they could give you a 2-up save target in smoke, sitting behind cover, and you could throw a grenade. It's probably not going to do that much. And then now your guy's trapped in the middle of nowhere and he's got to go do something next turn. So if your opponent is going to respond to a play like that because they know what you're doing, and this is something that Kill Team gets to eventually, especially when you get to higher tier play, because players should know what's kind of good because they've seen it a little bit and they've found ways to deal with it. What is your conceptual plan to interact with someone who's playing around you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So again,
I'll add one more note to this because
Sure.
Dylan did do this strategy against Can You Roll a Crit at the New York Open. I think he took out 2 Legionary at the first and basically the end of turn 1, opening of turn 2, and then Can You Roll a Crit just basically swung in with the rest of his models and tore everyone into little pieces. So there was a way to interact with it, and it was just move up to the midline and get stuck in, basically.
Yeah, I think in that situation, the best way to do it is to kind of fall back and hold the back line and push and again force them to come in. So the nice thing that Salvengers have is you have the Lugger, who's one of your operatives, gives you an extra equipment, but he does a free mission action. So he gives you a little bit of action economy to play into crit ops and score some extra points depending on the mission. The other side you could do as well is that if you're playing the kind of the contained game, you're still scoring probably a reliable 3. Maybe you're scoring more than that. And then I think the other thing too is you're trying to see those mistakes. So one of those things is you talked about is cover. In this case, obscuring, the use of cover and those things. The really nice things that Salvengers have is the ability to take off obscuring on one model. It does not work against the other 5 scary Zinch Corn operatives that are coming your way for sure. But at least you can take off one and you can utilize some of those resources like the jump pack and the grenade guy or the missile guy to give you some breathing room. So taking off obscuring, and then he also has the ability to take off cover as well. So then it allows some of your bigger guns to shoot. The other one too is I think people especially Salvengers are I think the jump pack is amazing and that play is really good. And sometimes it just doesn't go well. Sometimes it kind of falls apart. But I think the other thing too that in 40K we saw a lot, in Kill Team I think I see a little bit less of it. Players get really stuck in how things were and certain models and things like that. I think Salvengers, what's really cool about them is they have these great gunner options. They have I'm going to forget the name of it. It's like an auto rifle. It's rending. It's ceaseless rending. It's not heavy. What's really great about that is if you can stack that with a bunch of grudge tokens, you can certainly kind of play that same Zinch game that Legionnaires are already playing, but you're playing it with a model that you can throw away a lot easier. So I think one of the things that Kill Team in general is constantly adapting your list and your roster selection a little bit more. Look at things in the past. Even when I kind of got stuck into like the 3-month cycle, I would still make about 100 to 200 points of a 2,000 point list back in 40K days. Changes almost on a 2-weekly basis. And this was to play perfectly into that perfect matchup. So I think that's a really good strategy too that helps with that. In game, you just gotta try. You gotta see what happens. And unfortunately, sometimes you're just going to lose a game, and that's going to happen too. And if you do, take away from what happened, why did that happen? Have that great conversation with your opponent if you can, and then utilize some of those principles in your practice games and practice that out. So if you can, try to replicate that again when you come back. I've had the opportunity when I went down to New York, had a really good time. Played some amazing players, was able to replicate some of those games and some of those strategies just to practice those and kind of learn from that. A member of our community, Andrew, who won a golden ticket, he did not go to Worlds this year. We did the same thing all summer where he would kind of look at strategies of really top players and have me play them over and over again, all these things so he could get practice into it. So I think that's another way too that can help with that.
Practice makes perfect, but it's really perfect practice makes perfect.
Yeah, because you don't want to be practicing bad habits or anything like that.
Yeah.
No, I think practice games should be if I think they should take a long time. I think you should have a strategy with your opponent on who you're practicing with, what you're going to play. So I often play a lot of games. A friend of mine got me into Kill Team, Zach D, where we'll talk about exactly what table layouts we're going to play. We talk about what teams we're going to play. We talk about missions we're going to play. And then we also talk about things. Sometimes I will try things or he'll try different things to get some of that. So different practices. A big piece right now is we're going to gear up. I need to play some more games into novitiates. He's a pretty good novitiate player himself. And then we're going to start to look at kind of list compositions and roster selections that people have been taking. And we're going to play into missions and map layouts that are really bad for a team playing into novitiates. So that's another thing that we try to do a lot of as well.
Yeah, novitiates is kind of another one of my big examples of like having a strategy is like faction specific. Because if you don't know what you're about to get into when you're playing novitiates, you're going to have a really bad time. So like it's that one you can't really fix tactically, because if you're expecting that shooting is going to do more than 0 damage, you're wrong. So you really just need to adapt your whole strategy. So like for me, for example, I'm like with Phobos going into novitiates, I know that I need to bring probably 3 Reavers, and I need to stage very aggressively. And like part of it also is to like get some omni scramble angles so that they like I'm positioned aggressively, but they can't hit first with the thing that's going to do the most damage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too the other piece that comes into it is, you know, a lot of players will come to the table and, you know, will run around what your opponent is playing and all of that, but also looking at kind of those faction rules and team rules, because looking at kill team rules are so easy and accessible right now. Games Workshop's done a really good job. I know there's some third party pieces as well out there that have done a really good job. I think it's really key for, especially if you're playing competitive play and you want to play at the larger level, is you really should take the time to kind of memorize all the various factions, kind of gotchas and rules as much as possible. And it's really helpful not only in playing your games, but if you decide to, you know, support games as a TO or a weekly organizer of your kind of game night, it also helps to kind of, you know, smooth some of those things out as well. So, and that was much harder, surprisingly, in 40K, right? So, you know, we had 42 factions and there was a lot of data sheets, a lot of rules. You know, Kill Team right now, we're at 33 factions, right? 33 or 30, yeah. And, you know, it's a little bit easier to memorize those things and those gotchas. So if you're seeing and people talking about something, especially, go out and read them. That's one. Novitiates is a good example, but another one that, you know, recently came up for me was, you know, reading Hand of the Archon. You know, in the last edition, Hand of the Archon wasn't and Corsairs. Both of them weren't as in a great spot. Both are really good teams and have really amazing abilities. They seem really interesting, and they have some strong stuff that if you don't know what it does, it'll get you. So look at the elf teams, look at all of them, and kind of know that.
Yeah, obviously information is a weapon, especially when it comes to games like Kill Team or 40K or Magic the Gathering, or really any game where your decision making is going to be the thing that matters, right? Like when it comes to playing maybe a game of poker, the information space is all just probabilistic numbers. But when it comes to our more complicated word games, you do kind of have to know what words your opponent can wield against you.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they're not every team has enough words or enough important words where they make it out of the bucket. You know, me and Jason have been doing the week-to-week stat show. We've been seeing Hearthkyn basically trapped in the box. We don't really know why, but it's probably just that Marines are pretty hard for them right now. But there could be other reasons inside of the questions and answers box of like, why are Vespid bad right now? It's like, well, maybe Piercing 1 is not a good faction rule when the 2 best teams with 15% participation in the meta ignore your faction rule. It could be something else, but maybe that's the big confound. So it's kind of hard to know when you look at stats. When you made the jump to Hearthkyn Salvagers from Warp Coven, did you feel a decrease in your overall team ability? Because Warp Coven, everyone knows, probably one of the best teams. They did just win the World Championships. They have a hyper flexible team with both recon and security, so they can play defensively, they can play proactively, they can switch up their operative count, so they can go from anywhere between 6 activations and 11 if you really wanted to. Not that I think there's a ton of good reason to do it. But because they have all of that flexibility, did you find that you were using all of that flexibility? Did you feel the loss when you moved to Hearthkyn Salvagers? And how did you kind of look at building out your first set of plays when moving to Hearthkyn Salvagers from Warp Coven?
Yeah, that's a great question. So shout out again to George. I think playing George, I really saw that's how Warp Coven is played. And I think I'm a decent player, but I don't think I'm as skilled as anywhere close to that. So I think one of the things that I was really challenged with Warp Coven was you have so many decisions and so many tools. Applying those tools correctly can be really difficult. And I think that comes with a lot of practice. And I think if you really have that and good teammates to play against, you're going to do really well with them. And so as I kept playing, I played 2 more tournaments after New York Open with Warp Coven. I played a local, and I actually played a doubles event, which was wild in its own right. But with Warp Coven, my teammate was playing Legionnaire. We had a great time. I don't think everyone else did.
Good job.
But coming out of that, the thing that I came over to Salvagers is, they apply buffs for me in a really nice, concise, logical way that I really enjoy. The other thing that I was having a real struggle with is that I really like the Zangors. So I was playing kind of your 3 wizards. I was playing a couple of Zangors and usually played a gunner. Sometimes I'd play a gunner and a warrior and then 2 Zangors. Trying to figure out Zangors in this new edition opposed to last edition was a big shift for me. They're really more of opportunity pieces and mission pieces than they were kind of that combative piece. And I really like that raw damage and aggression piece. And I think that's what Salvagers do really well. But I think too, Salvagers are very deep. Again, I think the ways that you can have that very mobile jetpack and play some really cool plays with that. But at the same point, you also have, models that do free mission actions, models that, ignore obscuring on certain models that apply, a balanced reroll, models that apply, ways to take off accuracy 1 and this and this and this. And you kind of put all those together, and I think you can get some really interesting plays. And I think they are, at least an experience of playing them, I think they're a lot better than they were since the last edition.
They certainly got different tools compared to last edition. Not every team got different tools. Novitiates are a team that basically got a wholesale rework, and now they just function entirely differently because they're a much tankier team than they used to be. Hearthkyn Salvagers used to be a shooting team that preyed on elites, but now the 2 best elites prey on them to some extent because they ignore Pierce, and you really want Pierce to go off. At the end of the game, you do hit elites pretty hard because 3-5 is pretty good for a melee weapon, especially when you get a couple grudges going so you can slap people down. But their tool set did kind of change because now you have a better Alpha Strike. You could still Alpha Strike before, but the Alpha Strike now in a much more passive turn 1 capacity does catch people unawares a lot easier than anything that would have happened in the last edition of Kill Team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the ignoring 1, piercing 1 meta right now between those 2 factions it's a really strong role. It's a really strong ability. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that, the meta shifts around trying to solve that. I think one of the things that Legionnaires, I had also played keep going back to New York because I had some really awesome games, but I played Alex as well playing Legionnaires on ITD into my Warp Club, and he just decimated me very, very fast. No piercing 1 didn't matter when he 4 APL melted guns. It was just incredible to watch. But I think one of the things that I realized in that game and taking that forward into playing more against more Legionnaire opponents is that they utilize a lot of crits that really gets their bolters across. And so that was another piece of coming over to Salvagers is that they can apply crits, a lot of crits in a lot of ways because of the grudge tokens and because of a certain couple of guns and their abilities. So I think that's another thing too, is utilizing, let's say that it's not piercing one, just kind of ignoring that clause, utilizing that high damage and that high crit save, crit ability to kind of just push through that and try to push through as much damage as possible. Into Warp Coven, with the exception of like a Volcus, where you're moving back up onto, the third floor of a building or something like that, and you're kind of, you can't be targeted because of heavy cover. The wizards are kind of in a hard place. So that, they certainly can turn a crit to a normal. But even with piercing one, I think they're still in a challenge of surviving.
Yeah, I think Warp Coven's plan against the Hearthkyn is just to kill you so fast that by the time the grudges are getting you a return on investment, it's a little bit too late because you've lost, 6 or 7 models, because each one of the rubrics can kill someone, or a Zangor can, a random Zangor with ceaseless blades can just generally kill an 8-wound dwarf. And if they take enough of them, it does kind of skew the matchup a little bit, especially because the sorcerers, if they're allowed to ping pong with 9-inch temporal flux, can just rewind and just almost always be safe when they're hitting you, which is pretty good. So right now, I kind of expect that if there were changes to the 3 top dogs, there's going to be a couple teams that filter up right underneath them. So we'll see what happens there. Do you have any like wish list things for the meta if you could make like one small change or one large change?
Yeah. So I've been playing GW games for so many years at this point. I'd really like to say that this Kill Team 24 launch is the best launch that GW has had in my experience. Personally, does not mean that every rule is perfect. It does not mean that things don't need to be changed. But I think the launch of products, the launch of all these rules that were free, all these things are really great resources, and it's a good way. I think some of the challenges right now are, I think, Legionnaires and Warp Coven. I think it's hard to change Warp Coven in my mind without reworking the entire faction. But, we've seen GW do that for AOS and 40K for various armies. So that we could see a huge rework for that. I think Legionnaires, the thing with Legionnaires, it's also kind of challenging. It might be that you mark lock things a little bit more so that they necessarily don't get every ability from every mark and that sort of thing. Maybe they change, the generic trooper warrior model to be a little bit more mark locked on specific things. But I don't know necessarily how to write that, because I think the other thing is I don't want to not validate Warp Coven and Legionnaire players. I want them to have fun. I want them to play, but maybe negating piercing one might be a little bit of a problem. So there's something there. The other thing that I think would be really good is Inquisition. Inquisition seems like it's the easiest change, which is you just don't get as many Melta-Guns. So kind of go back to the old rule that they had. It's interesting you brought up Kashikins. Probably, I would assume everyone's just playing Kashikins in Inquisition, right? So, I mean, Ceaseless is pretty good.
The 5 best Kasrkin operatives do just show up in a startling number of Inquisition agent games at the World Championships of Warhammer. So perhaps giving them a free CP every turn to free dash everybody was maybe a little bit too much as far as generic balancing goes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be really interesting to see how they change Warp Coven and Legionnaires. I think the Inquisition change is pretty obvious to all of us of how that will look. And I think Inquisition still stays in a pretty good spot. I think what we'll be really curious to see is what that tier below, how they bubble up and what that looks like. And I think, honestly, you allow them to bubble up for a few months, and then you retweak it again, and you keep retweaking, plus adding all these new factions that they're going to be adding as well. I think you're going to have a really interesting meta. I think one of the parts of the meta that was I actually kind of liked, I know a lot of people did not, was the Felgor meta that we kind of saw last year, and it was only really for this year. Correction, really wasn't for all that long. It wasn't a couple of months, and then there were some changes, and then we kind of moved forward. So, I think giving everyone a little bit time in the sun is a good thing. I'm really hoping that Salvagers don't get any changes, because I think they're in a spot, if the big 3 come down a little bit, that they're going to be able to push up with maybe Necrons, maybe Harlequin and a few others to do really, really well.
Corsairs, I think they're going to pop up. I think Felgor's going to pop out. I mean, like, if Phobos doesn't get tapped, they're going to be a horrible menace.
Yes. I when the edition dropped, I looked at the Phobos rules and saying to my friend Andrew, I was like, yeah, Phobos will be great in 6 months. Guarantee. Like, they'll make their edition changes, they'll make their FAQs, they'll make their army changes as GW always does, and Phobos won't get touched because they're kind of, at the bottom of that Astartes elites meta part. But man, they're going to be really good. I also think Nemesis Claw could be interesting. I mean, I think there's a lot there too. So we'll see. And I imagine we'll get changes probably in the next month would be my guess. They always drop on a random Tuesday or something. It's always in like the middle of the day, and I get 15 text messages of, "Did you read all of the FAQs and things?" As probably every listener gets as well.
Yep, the Discords absolutely blow up. Like, if I wake up and there's already like 100 messages in the general chat of my local Discord, I'm like, "Oh, that's the data slate."
Yeah, when they launched the new rules for 24 for all the teams, Android got it first, or at least so I had to wait an hour. So my friends who had Androids were like pumping me all the rules, and we're trying to like go through it and via text. And then I got the rules and I had to go to work. So I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'll come back to this at the end of the day. And by that point, there was like 1,000 messages for that. I think the best part about that I've learned through all these years of this, both 40K, Kill Team, is that you guys do really great content. All these great creators out there for Kill Team, 40K, AOS. It's just easier to wait to the end of the day because someone's going to summarize it in like 4 videos. And while you're at your paint desk, I'd rather hear it from you, Travis, hear about the changes. You're a world-class TO, and it's nice to know that like that is the exact ruling and wording and easy to apply it to the next, set of games.
Yeah, thanks. But, you're a TO in your own right. You've got the New England group that's been popping off a little bit. There's a lot of different Kill Team communities, and that's the original reason why me and Jason kicked off this whole podcast to begin with. And I know you've been putting in a lot of work in the New England area to build up that local scene. We've had Mandy on here from a different part of that area. We've had you on, and I know that it's been growing. So you want to tell us a little bit about what's been going on in the New England northeasterly, even northeasterly part of the United States?
Yeah. So so again, I've been playing for about a year and a half here. So when I started, we had 2 places in New England that you could play Kill Team. So you could play down in Norton with Mandy, who is the TO down there. And you could play in Maine at a store that unfortunately has closed since, but we have a new store that we've been playing at as well in Maine. And that was it. Those are the only 2. What I went out was, from 40K, you could go to like 2 tournaments a weekend to 3 tournaments a weekend. So going from 2 for the entire New England to like, all these, dozens of tournaments to 2 a month was a big change for me. So what we kind of did was we built up, Norton was always building, which is down with Mandy's crew down there. And Jesse, who's this just amazing member of the community, someone who knows almost everybody in Kill Team in some regards all over the US and internationally, plays down there. We got together this summer and said, look, how do we build on what we have? And so since this summer, we've gone from 2 stores that are running tournaments to 7 stores running tournaments. We have a Kill Team tournament in every state in New England, with the exception of Rhode Island. But Rhode Island has just come on board. So they said that hopefully they'll be running events in the next 3 to 6 months, which is really, really exciting. So we have, that means that we have 7 active places that you can play tournaments. We have a community that went from about 20 players to over 100 in about a year, which is Jesse and I really getting out there, meeting very small pockets of people, and then offering everything to help them. So if you want to run a weekly game night or a tournament, can we just show up and bring all the terrain? Can we teach people how to play? Can we teach you how to run Best Coast pairing? Can we do this? Can we do that? These are really good tools. And slowly but surely, in about 6 months, we have this amazing community. We have a really great Discord, New England Kill Team. It's linked to various Discords all around for kill teams. So if you're ever interested in playing a tournament in New England or a local or what have you, we have a really good setup for that. We also support our hobby community, and we support our narrative play as well. We have a couple of stores to do some narrative events as well. So it's been crazy. And Jesse is just someone who's very connected with everyone, which has been amazing. And then I go back to my experience of TOing for 40K events, both small and large. So putting those two things together has really set us up and had a really good time. So we just had a tournament on Sunday, a week, really recently. And I brought all the terrain. We had a new TO run it. He knew how to use, I showed him how to use Best Coast Pairing. We had 8 players, and this was a store that didn't run any events for Kill Team in years. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, growing those communities and making sure that everyone has the skill sets and like growing those skill sets is super important for getting the community going. Because as much as a single TO can do a lot of work, if the TO has to take a break, suddenly everything grinds to a halt. So making sure that if you are a community leader in your area, you've got a couple other people that you notice want to put in some of the work to keep things going, it's always very helpful. Because as much as it's a one-man grind, it's also a community effort at the end of the day. And the New England group has been very helpful. You guys came down and brought terrain for the New York Open, which I'm eternally grateful for. And we've got, other tournament circuits outside of the ITC brewing up in the US. So the UTC is something that I am helping Goonhammer with. So, if you have so many New England Discords, make sure that everybody gets onto the UTC and we can get everybody into the Invitational. So for anyone who's listening who is curious, hit me up on Discord and I can get you involved in the UTC, the United Tournament Circuit, which is kind of a circuit more for local stores than it is for the broader GT level events.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. And I think too, you bring up a really good point of ways to set up your community. Jesse and I do a lot of this running of kind of this Discord and the social piece, but also traveling in New England for tournaments. The furthest tournament for me is in Vermont and Burlington. It's 4.5 hours away. And those Burlington guys will come down to Maine. They'll come down to Mass. They're incredible. They're really good players. I will go on record right now that I think one of the best Blades of Cain players of all time is in Burlington, Vermont. His name is Milton. He's incredible. But they travel kind of locally within our New England meta space and they don't really kind of expand out. So one of the things that we're trying to do is trying to promote that to the larger tournaments, but also utilize kind of some of these resources. The other thing that we found that's really helpful is it's really great in a community. You want a good TO who can run an event. You want a kind of a backup TO who, if something happens, they're sick, kids, whatever, something happens, they could pinch hit and kind of run an event. The other thing I think is really important is you want to have really strong competitive players that, promote, different styles of play, that sort of piece. And then finally, I think you want, players that are kind of the hobbyists and the narrative players and that stuff. And if you can kind of mix that big soup together, you can have a really great community. And and sometimes it's nice too, if you have your local game night, it's okay to talk about it out loud of like, so-and-so does, it's kind of really good at this and really good at that. And kind of getting those things kind of written out in stone is really helpful, especially for your local scenes. But as you expand out, now that we're running tournaments in 7 stores, each TO kind of runs their events a little bit differently, but we also run in a commonality. So, it really helps out of knowing that kind of knowledge too.
Having the institutional knowledge is a big part of growing a larger scene. So that's part of why we have the Discord. That's part of why we connect different communities across the globe. We just had Joe from Beijing on here a couple weeks ago, and he's been getting help on the Discord. So for any burgeoning TOs or people who just kind of want to talk to some other people who have been starting their own communities, join us on the Discord. Join us on the New England Discord, catch up with Will and go from there, because it's a fun game. There's a lot of people playing, and it's easier to get into than some other miniature games.
Absolutely. And the other thing too is we have these local events, but I'd love to talk about, Travis, if I could talk about Everwinter coming up here.
Yeah, we're heading into the end of the podcast, so now's the time to do the big shout outs. Everwinter is a really big Northeastern tournament, and it looks like you're heading up the Kill Team division this year. So tell us about it. Tell us, what you're excited about, and what the vibe is going to be like.
Yeah, so Wicked Dicey runs 2 large tournaments a year in New England. One is Everwinter, which is happening January 4th and 5th at the Hyatt Regency in downtown Boston. And then we have Iron Weld, which is in Wyatt, Massachusetts as well. That's usually run in late May, early June. So Wicked Dicey sets these things up. All these events are up on Best Coast Bearing. So if you're interested in coming to this event, I would highly suggest to register through Best Coast Bearing, as you can get your tournament pass and get your event pass all at the same time. Makes life a little bit easier. We're running a 5-round tournament over the course of 2 days. And a little piece of that is we ran a 6-round at Iron Weld, and there was some feedback about just maybe dropping 1 round to allow people to get home earlier, but also just have a more concise game across 5 games. So we have 5 games. They're going to be 2 hours long. We have a really great player packet that's on wickeddicey.com, and I'll also post it to our Discord. I cannot say it's as long as Travis's support document for New York Open, which was just amazing. Like, by the way, Travis, that you had all that conciseness and rules. But we did take some of the things that you guys did in New York really well, which is we're going to be running all 3 board types. We're going to be running Volcus as our primary boards for about 50%, and then 30% is going to be Into the Dark, and then the 20% is going to be Beta Decima. So we're going to be playing all 3 board types. That focus might change a little bit as we get closer to the event and we get some more map packs out for some of the Kill Team 21 terrain, just to give a little bit more variety. On the event itself, I put all the missions already in there, our timetables and all of that. We're giving prize support out for 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. And we're also giving out Best Painted as well. It's a wicked fun event. We have 32 spots, and we already have, I think, 16 or 17 spots already filled. So we already have a big group already coming. It's going to be a bunch of amazing New England players. You can meet us. It's going to be a really nice hotel in Boston, and it's going to be a great weekend to play some Kill Team. So hopefully you guys can come and join us. And kind of see our New England meta and have some fun games.
Bring in the new year with some Kill Team.
Yeah, it's going to be sweet. We had Iron Weld in May, and it was just a blast. It was a blast to run a GT level event. We're hopeful in the future that maybe one day we'll be able to be a golden ticket event. We're still working on that process, but it's a really fun event. There's incredible vendors at this. You'll see there's 40K and AOS as well. So if you're traveling with some buddies who want to play 40K or AOS, or there's some other war games as well. I think War Machine and BattleTech. It's a great way to spend a weekend with them. So you go play Kill Team for some games, and then they go out, play their games, and come back, and you're in this great city of Boston, which has amazing food and amazing culture.
All right. Well, I know we have a lot of New York players who listen to the podcast, so if anyone is interested in going, we'll have links in the show notes. Obviously, for anyone listening who wants to go, travel to the New England area is probably not that crazy, and hopefully from New York there's a train that makes sense. I won't be able to because I'll be flying back from some personal stuff, but hopefully I can make it for the next year because I do want to give it a shot. At least maybe I'll come to Ironwell this year.
We'd love to have you guys, and for all you New York players, I believe there's a express train from like Grand Central or Penn Station that goes right into Boston. It should be easy to get to the hotel from there too. So hopefully that makes life a little easy, and take a little public transit, and take some stress off driving up from the city.
Yeah, for sure. All right, man. Thanks for coming on, talking about Hearthkyn Salvagers, playing only Contain, and talking a little bit about some skills that you brought over from 40K and the New England Kill Team scene in general.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be on, guys. And it's great to share about our incredible meta up here and some of my games. So thank you, guys.
In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only Contain.